and welcome to Just Energy. Join us on a journey through time and space as we explore alternative perspectives on some of the world's most mysterious topics. I'm your host, Dr. Rita Louise, and thank you all for joining us today. There's a growing phenomena of alleged UFO sightings in the world. They are the biggest mystery of our time, yet with hundreds of UFO researchers and countless witness testimonies, belief in UFOs remains on the fringe. What's really going on in our skies? Are a group of extraterrestrials visiting our planet? Are they abducting us and taking us back to their craft to do their strange medical procedures? Or is the military involved, and if so, what's their connection? Today we're going to be talking to Bill Birnes from the hit show UFO Hunters. Bill will take us behind the scenes to help us sort through some of these unexplained mysteries. Bill Birnes is a New York Times best-selling author, a magazine publisher, and a New York literary publishing agent who has written and edited over 25 books and encyclopedias in the fields of human behavior, true crime, current affairs, history, psychology, business, computing, and the paranormal. He is probably best known for his work appearing on the hit series UFO Hunter and Ancient Aliens. His latest books, UFO Hunter, Book 1 and 2, follow his UFO Hunters team taking you behind the camera and providing you with deeper insights into the UFO Hunters case file. So please welcome Bill Birnes. Hey Bill, how's it going?
I'm good. How are you, Rita? How are things?
Things are wonderful, and I'm just so excited to have you on. But I have to ask, Bill, you have so much work that you do with television. You released these two books, UFO Hunter Volume 1 and Volume 2, but why create a companion to the TV show?
First of all, they were an answer to questions, because a lot of people asked what were my personal feelings about the various episodes in the show, because the essence of the show was basically three individuals, kind of three characters organically related to each other because we each have different perspectives, going out and investigating the same types of stories and then coming back with three different takes on the stories and finding ways to see whether there was actually common ground, were there facts that we shared, where are the disagreements, where are the disputes over facts, and what are the individual psychological reactions to the various stories they're hearing. So if you're a dyed-in-the-wool skeptic, for example, you don't believe this stuff, you believe the stuff is either all crazy or delusional or people are making it up or whatever, you're going to have one set of reactions that you are preconditioned to have because of your mindset. If you are a true believer, you're going to have a whole other set of reactions, and you're really going to be willing to just take the Kool-Aid and drink it right down. But is there a middle ground where folks, even people who have totally different mindsets, completely conditioned in different ways, can agree on certain facts? Yeah, these facts are real. And what happens when you follow the trail down the rabbit hole of those particular facts? Where do you end up? And that was the premise of UFO Hunters. Not to say that UFOs are real, not to say they were all hoaxes, but in this kind of like Sherlock Holmes, Dr. Watson way, eliminate all the stuff you could eliminate logically, then look at what's left, and then whatever is left, that's what you investigate, and just let it take you where it takes you.
But I feel like that's a really good approach because it's not necessarily going in with a preconceived notion, but going in with a more open mind and letting the evidence present itself, whatever that may be.
Right. I mean, I really cut my teeth, such as they are, on true crime back in the 1970s, 1980s, when I first began writing stuff back in the 80s. And when you talk to really experienced, savvy homicide detectives and FBI agents from the behavioral science unit. I used to work for the Department of Justice as a data analyst on cold case crimes. One of the things you find out is that these investigators are all evidence driven, and their big criticism for against their counterparts who would come up with these theories of crimes based on their own belief systems was that, you know, you're going down the wrong trail. And there's a real perpetrator out there, and you guys are chasing a phantom because you won't look at where the evidence is taking you. Two classic cases. These are two classic cases. Back in the late 70s, early 80s, there was a case in it. There was a case of multiple homicide of children in Atlanta called the Atlanta child murders. Very famous case. Folks who were aware were watching television, watching the news, know this case. All these young African-American males disappeared from their homes. And people would find their bodies and the police would find their bodies in the Chattahoochee River, and they were perplexed. Who's doing this to these children? This is obviously a pedophile. This is obviously somebody who's a real monster. And so they couldn't solve the case. And so the police chief in Atlanta at the time was Dr. Lee Brown, who's since become famous. I think he was in New York. He was a mayor. So he was a famous guy. And he pulled together what was known as the super cops. This was the dream team of police officers from the FBI, from the DeKalb County Sheriff, from the Atlanta PD, and then and then psychiatrists and police departments all over the country.
This was before profiling too.
This was at the dawn of This was right at the dawn of that. Okay, and so he pulled it together. And the problem with serial murder cases is that a large percentage is political, because you've got people who are victim advocates. You've got families of victims. You've got residents in the area who are correctly fearful. You've got politicians who are running for office who want the support of the people who are the victims, and you've got the police force. Police don't like to look stupid. Never make a fool out of a cop, especially a detective, because that gets them really mad. So you've got all these people with these mindsets, these preset conditions. So you had one advocacy group in Atlanta saying, oh, well, this was clearly a racial crime. You've got Ku Klux Klan people that are abducting young African-American boys, young African-American males from the neighborhood and killing them. That was one theory. But this is an African-American neighborhood. This is an ethnic community neighborhood. So if some white guy, a redneck-looking white guy, walked into an African-American neighborhood and walked out with a young African-American boy, and you know that the night has 1,000 eyes, right? So wouldn't everybody sitting by their windows, especially the grandparents, notice, what is that white guy doing with that young African-American child? What is he doing? Why is he leaving with that guy? And how would some white guy gain the trust of a young African-American boy circa what, 1978, 1979? This is not the 2000s. So that theory, which was promulgated as these were racial crimes, it didn't hold water logically, even though that was the push. Well, so along came the psychiatrists and the super cops. And the super cops, the first thing they said was, let's recanvass the neighborhood. And they recanvassed the whole neighborhood. Nobody ever saw a white guy with a black child, period. So with all the people living there, they really eliminated that theory because there were no witnesses. So they put it in the gray box for the time being, okay? Then, here was the idea. They said, since all the bodies were being dropped in the Chattahoochee River off this one bridge, instead of running around like a bunch of chickens, let's just stake out this one spot. Let's stake out that particular bridge. Sure enough, one night, somebody is driving across the bridge. They see a car stop. They hear a splash. They run to the guy, they run to the river. It's the body of a young child. Who is the guy? He is a young black man who was a photographer. The more they investigate, and they found the forensic evidence. They found carpet fibers. They found all kinds of stuff on the kid from where the guy lived. When they investigated this guy, they found out, A, his parents were school teachers in the Atlanta schools, so he had easy access back and forth. 2, he was a photographer, and they saw his advertising flyers all over the neighborhood advising to come in and do school photographs and birthday photographs. So all the children trusted him. So the way a serial killer works is that a serial killer, A, begins by establishing trust with a potential victim, just like Ted Bundy and the broken arm routine. Oh, help me, I broke my arm. Can you please help me fix my car? My roof rack is broken. That's how he would attract his victims. John Wayne Gacy picked up his victims. They were homeless young men at a bus station in Chicago. He gained their trust and picked them up. That's what the Jeffrey Dahmer, same thing in Milwaukee and West Allis, Wisconsin. You gain the trust. This guy was a photographer, so he gained their trust. So the point was, what the police did was they followed the logical trail of evidence all the way down the line to a completely politically incorrect solution, which was that a young black man was killing young black children. And it raised a lot of hackles. Well, and so I knew all the police in that, and I wrote a chapter on that for my book, The Riverman, about Ted Bundy. So the thing was that if you take that line of reasoning, it's the same reasoning in any Sherlock Holmes book. Holmes, it seems outrageous, but that's where the logic takes you. And you follow that down the line to UFO cases, guess what you get? You get a whole new way of analyzing these things. Some cases turn out to be totally false, total hoaxes, total misunderstandings, but some cases turn out to be completely unexplainable by conventional means. And that's what the two books are. Which cases turn out to be fraudulent or mistakes or not UFOs, and which cases turn out to be totally unexplainable conventionally. And that's what the show is about. And that was why I did the books, to explain the logic behind the show. Because if you're doing reality television, some idiot like me is not going to lecture you on Sherlock Holmesian logic.
Well, and that makes sense. Giving people the background and the insights. I mean, you have an hour to do an entire episode, and I can see where there's just a lot of material that hits the editing floor that just doesn't, that there's just not enough time, or there's not enough excitement going on, that it just gets eliminated.
And it's not really an hour. It's only something like 52 minutes of airtime. So you may shoot 10 hours of video to get you 52 minutes of actual airtime, because you've got commercials and station IDs, and you're up and down, and then you've got your intros and your outros. So when you look at what you have left, you've lost 10 minutes. So think of all the shooting you have to do to boil it down to 50 minutes of camera time.
Does it really take about 10 hours of footage to put together a 1 hour, I'll just use that 1 hour segment?
Sure, because there are some witnesses that you really like, but who drone on and on like me. And so you want to really get down to the essence. You always have to do your B-roll and your establishment shots. I mean, you don't go to Germany to find the hollowed out mountain caves where the Nazis were building the bell, and then not spend at least a good 4 or 5 minutes of time doing all these fabulous establishment shots on the inside of that tunnel. It's a spooky, hollowed out cavern, dripping water with German machine gun nests all over the place, paths, and vents leading from the inner mountain all the way to the top. And we had some great scenes. And remember, you're doing this for camera. So as much information as you're trying to impart, it has to be visual because you're trying to pick up an audience. You're picking up an audience because you've got sponsors that are picking up the show. And those sponsors have to be wowed. So you've got to have a wow factor. Mm-hmm. So those are the givens when you're doing reality television. And sometimes a show will fall flat on its face, and sometimes a show will take off. We did a show, we did hypnotic regression. Okay, for somebody who claimed that he was regressed by somebody who was taken by aliens. Well, I mean, anybody who's had any experience dealing with psychological trauma, I'm a psychologist as well as a lawyer, but anybody who's had experience dealing with psychological trauma knows that one thing the brain does to protect itself from the actual fear, from the post-traumatic event fear of an event, because it's not just, people think, oh, it's just it's not. It's a real physical event. When a person has had a traumatic event, and we know that now from all our wars in the Middle East and Vietnam, when somebody has had a traumatic event, it is a physical impact, a form of physical trauma on a certain part of the brain, on the amygdala. And so every time something hits the brain, which reminds the individual of that initial trauma, all the psychological reactions, but the physiological reactions occur also, right? There's an adrenaline rush, there's fight or flight mechanism, and depending upon the severity of that trauma, the person will either react completely illogically, become violent, or hide. And we know this. We know this from sexual abuse victims. We know this from combat trauma victims. We know this. Well, that's also the case of so many of these people who claim alien abduction, that there was a traumatic event in their lives. Usually it's child abuse. And that's what happened with this particular episode of UFO Hunters.
So you did the whole regression, and that's where you
did a whole regression. And by the way, nothing is more boring on television than a hypnotic session. Okay, I mean, do you really want to have a show where there's a 15-minute segment where somebody is going to sleep? I don't think so. But so we did it. And so the person begins to react. But the reacting wasn't to some alien craft coming down. It was to somebody that had frightened his mother into such a panic she wouldn't leave her room, had frightened the grandmother, and was threatening this person and creating a screen memory of an alien to cover up the fact this kid was most likely abused in some way as a child. Now that's very difficult. And now you're on camera and you're doing this. And I vowed at that point, I was the consulting producer and I wrote a lot of the episodes. I vowed at that point we would never again have a hypnotic regression on camera. And another show had a hypnotic regression, which was very, very funny. It was the MUFON, I think it was something like UFOs over the Earth or something. And there was this case of this person who said that he saw aliens, figures. This is somewhere in one of the Carolinas. And sure enough, they did a hypnotic regression, and this person described in vivid detail what he saw. Then they made the catastrophic mistake of putting this person on a polygraph. Well, the polygraph operator, and I know that as I said, I worked for the Department of Justice 1,000 years ago, and one of the problems with polygraph operators, especially polygraph operators trained by law enforcement, is that they're not out to get to the truth. They're out to get you to say something incriminating so the graph shows that you were aware of some falsity, and that was why you had this electrobiological reaction that's on the polygraph graph. Okay? It doesn't matter whether you're telling the truth or not. It's simply a biological reaction. Right. That's why polygraphs are not allowed as testimonial evidence in court. Because not that they could be tricked, but because they're not accurate. And so sure enough, this person who said he saw aliens was regressed to actually describe it. It was very, very engrossing. Now he's on a polygraph, and he's lying. And so at the end of it, the polygraph operator says, well, the person is not telling the truth. These are all falsehoods. He never did what he said he did. But what nobody did, And that was the problem, was bring in a certified therapist, a psychotherapist, to say, hey, listen, he might have seen what he described under hypnosis. He might have fully engaged with that. But guess what? He didn't believe it. He believed that his conventional mind, his analytical overlay, telling him what was reason, was obfuscating what he actually saw in this event. And therefore, he believed he was lying. And that's what showed up on the polygraph test. So it was a big kind of red-faced embarrassment, but perfectly explainable. That's what we tried to avoid in UFO Hunters.
Well, and you bring up the whole abduction experience, and it seems like an increasing number of people are coming forward saying that they've had some kind of an abduction experience. What are your thoughts on the whole phenomena? I mean, you brought up the very valid point that some people use aliens as an overlay for child abuse or some other kind of trauma. Do you think that the abduction experience is real? And if so, how big of a phenomenon do you think it is?
I think that some abduction experiences are real, or let's say abduction / contact / encounter. Mm-hmm. Okay? Because in some cases you can't really distinguish one from the other. So when you do this false taxonomy, what then happens is you eliminate something that's kind of a vital part of what it is that you're studying, because you've kind of made a categorization that's imposed from the outside. So let's just say that take a case like Delphos, Kansas. Okay, this is a great encounter, abduction, witness case. And in that particular case, here's what you look for. So you've got somebody saying, I was abducted by aliens. Okay, you're abducted by aliens. Is there any extrinsic evidence beside your testimony to show that what happened might have been anomalous? Well, no, it was the middle of the night and I really went through the wall. So you examine the person. Are there scars? Are there marks? Are there metallic shards inside the person's body? Does what the person say comport with what other abduction type people have said who don't know each other? Mm-hmm. When you do the examination, a lot of abduction therapy sessions begin with group. Group is great. If you're a therapist and you're handling a number of patients and they've got similar issues, let's say parent issues, spousal issues, child abuse issues, it helps to get these things talked about in group. So you're in group and you're talking. But if you apply this to alien abductions and you're going to regress some of these people, look what you're doing in group. What you're doing in group is
feeding them information.
Yes, and you're preconditioning them to say what you want them to say under hypnotic regression. So absolutely, that is false from the outset, because you've basically preconditioned, you preset your outcomes. So what you want is there to be no pre-interviews, no suggestion on your part. You just want, what was your dream? What do you think that it was? So we would see videos on UFO Hunters. People would bring us videos of their hypnotic regression sessions. And in some of these sessions, therapists, this was astounding. These are therapists. They have their PhDs just like we do. And they would say things like, well, when the alien encountered you on board the ship and you put your hands over your ears, would you do that? Right? I mean, if you were in court, a judge would throw that right the hell out of court. Mm-hmm. Where's your foundation?
Well, you're also contaminating their commentary.
Exactly.
And putting them on the ship with the alien.
Right. Exactly. So that's the problem. So that's one thing. But what about this whole extrinsic evidence? You take a case like Betty and Barney Hill, for example. Mm-hmm. Okay.
The classic.
The first classic case, 1961, Exeter, New Hampshire, right near Portsmouth. First of all, one of the questions you have to ask is, well, were they in it for the fame and fortune? This is the classic abduction case, okay, in which Betty described this large-headed alien. Well, her therapist, by the way, and I'm not going to waste your time going through the whole thing, but it's a fascinating chain of events. Her therapist under hypnosis, she draws this large-headed alien. Now, her therapist was a psychiatrist, very famous psychiatrist named Benjamin Simon. Benjamin Simon became famous in World War II because he was one of the first psychiatrists to use both hypnosis and sodium pentothal, truth serum, twilight sleep, to elicit memories of a traumatic event, usually among pilots, so as to get them back in the air. And the book, by the way, the novel that was done was Captain Newman, M.D. That was the book, and became the Gregory Peck movie, and Bobby Darin was the guy who took the flax juice. Mm-hmm. That was Dr. Simon. He was known for that. So Betty and Barney Hill, they have this experience, and it's both missing time, memories they can't recover, but also memories they had. So fully conscious, they saw the light. Fully conscious, they saw this thing land in the road ahead of them. Fully conscious, they saw these small creatures, humanoid creatures, walk out of the craft toward their car. They both tried to flee. They were both grabbed. They were both taken into a clearing. And at that point, their conscious memories end. The next thing they realize is that they're in the car. It's 3 or so hours later, 2 hours later, and they're pulling up into their own driveway. What happened to that time? Their own memories do not comport with the dashboard clock in the car or the clocks in the house. Well, okay, so Betty reports it to her family the next day. She calls her sister, and then Kathy Martin, who's her niece. She learns the whole story over the phone, and it sits. But they have physical problems, Barney especially, physical problems. Barney has these sores right around his genital area. He can't explain it. They go to the doctor. The doctor can't figure it out, but Barney has hypertension anyway, so the doctor says, okay, maybe I can't find anything physical, but your blood pressure is too high. I don't know what these sores are. Maybe since I can't find anything physical beyond the high blood pressure, maybe you guys should talk to a psychiatrist. So in the psychiatric session, they tell him what happened. The person says, okay, there are memories you have to find. I know exactly the person. That's Dr. Benjamin Simon. So they go to Dr. Simon. Dr. Simon regresses both of them independently. So they don't know what each is saying. They both relate the same story or similar stories of being taken aboard a spacecraft. Betty talks about a star system that was not at that point in time uncovered. Actually, it turns out she was exactly on point, but years later when it turns up in the Gleason catalog. Then she talks about a medical procedure where this examiner inserts a long, thin tube into her womb and extracts a fluid. Well, that's amniocentesis. That was a full 10 years before obstetricians and gynecologists were performing amniocentesis. How would she have known that? She wouldn't know. She's a social worker. How would she know about amniocentesis? Then Phyllis Budinger, Dr. Phyllis Budinger, who's a chemist, she worked for the oil companies, she gets a hold of Betty Hill's dress. And where Betty Hill described where these creatures grabbed her by her shoulders and underneath and her arms, there are protein stains on the dress. Then the car, there was physical damage to the car. And as it turns out, they both described these large-headed aliens. Well, Benjamin Simon, if you look and obviously you've done that, go look in the DSM, and what you find is there is no diagnostic code for alien abduction. It doesn't exist, right? So how can you bill a patient if there's no diagnostic code? Where this is before Medicare, so you really can't go to Medicare and get a bill. But really, how are you going to bill somebody? You can't. So there's no diagnostic code for alien abduction. Doesn't exist in the world of psychiatrists and psychologists. However, so Benjamin Simon comes up with a theory. He says that they were seeing alien stuff on TV, and sure enough, that alien head was the face of the Outer Limits. It was a characterization created by Wah Ming Chang for that particular show. He was the special effects guy. And so he believes that either Barney or Betty saw the show, imparted it to the other person, so it's kind of a folie à deux. And so the two of them are reporting, Yes, except for the fact that other people saw the same UFO that Betty and Barney saw, that the people at Pease Air Force Base were investigating the same thing. And even though Benjamin Simon, to his dying day, never believed they saw an alien, the person who was now they didn't know what they told Benjamin Simon. So the person who's transcribing their hypnotic regression sessions, of which they're unaware because he erases their memories, takes it to her friend who's a travel writer in Boston. He is so astounded, he takes it to the Boston Globe. Bingo! They become the poster children for alien abduction, and that begins the modern alien abduction movement in America. But it was never the intent of Betty and Barney Hill to tell their story to the American public. So I believe that, plus the extrinsic evidence. I have investigated case after case after case where there's physical trace evidence to show that something anomalous happened that was beyond what maybe it's multiply witnessed. Maybe it's that the people actually believe what happened, and other witnesses have seen have seen similar craft. In the case of Delphos, Kansas, not only
we need to take a quick break.
Okay.
Okay.
Yep.
And for the listeners, as a reminder, if you're enjoying today's program and you want to hear more from Bill or our other amazing guests, please visit justenergyradio.com and gain access to our over 9 years of show archives.